How can we account for evolution that appears to know where it's going, to create structures that have no function until they are fully formed? This is the Krebs cycle used by every animal and plant to burn sugar for usable energy. One of the greatest mysteries in biology is how evolution manages to be as efficient as it is. We can trace the biochemistry at a level Darwin never dreamed of, and it's clear now how many pieces have come together just to make the smallest things happen. But the picture that Darwin painted for us needs for evolution to proceed by tiny steps, each individual step small enough that it might just happen by chance, and each step has to provide some. So I want to tell you about an idea that has been developed by John Joe McFadden, University of Surrey in England. Maybe life makes use of quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is able to coordinate distant events into a big picture. Human technology has so far been able to harness this property of quantum mechanics only in very simple, limited ways, for example, the laser. But it is conceivable that life is way ahead of us on this, and that's what accounts for some of the things that living things can do that machines can't do. The most mysterious and controversial piece of quantum mechanics is called by the uninformative name collapse of the wave function, or equivalently they sometimes say the measurement problem. Well, neither name really tells you why this is something that you would ever care about. This is a picture that Richard Feynman painted for us when he came up with quantum electrodynamics in the last part of the 1940s. In the quantum world, a system behaves wildly while you're not looking. It does every which thing and takes every possible path and every impossible path. This is called superposition, and in this case the word actually does give you an idea of what is meant. It's like a grand game of red light, green light. You turn your head away, the system is doing everything at once, the particle is going through both slits at the same time, the chemical bond is both a double bond and a single bond, the electron is spread out through the box in a way that's described by a probability amplitude. Then you turn your head back and you take a look and you find the system is frozen in one state only. The particle is emerged at the other end of the two slits and it hits a detector in a particular place. You shine a light at an electron and you find it's always in one place only and not spread out everywhere. Turning your head is the red light in the game of red light, green light. It's the measurement in the measurement problem that philosophers of quantum mechanics talk about. Turning your head and looking and measuring triggers the collapse of the wave function. So the top picture here represents the probability that it might be here, it might be there, anywhere from the left to the right. The after shot on the bottom, it's now you know all the probability is in one place. You know exactly where it is. So this gets more interesting when you realize that quantum mechanics permits all kinds of things to be measured. Essentially any question that you can design an experiment to ask can be a measurement. You can measure the particle's energy instead of its position, and then the wave function collapses all right, but it doesn't collapse to a particular place. It collapses to an exact energy and it remains spread out all over the box. Or you can measure the frequency of its vibration, or you can measure its spin. Yes, electrons are constantly spinning about their axes as they travel through space in a way that you can imagine to be like the Earth spinning about its axis, except that the direction that the electron is spinning, whether it's vertical or horizontal or clockwise or counterclockwise, the direction is every which way at once, a superposition. a probability amplitude. That is, it's a probability function until you measure it, and then all of a sudden it's frozen in one particular direction. So if you've ever had an MRI, then you know about an application of this idea. When a strong magnetic field is applied, then a proton's spin direction can be pinned down in a measurement, and many such measurements are pieced together to map a picture of your brain or your rotator cuff or the meniscus of your kneecap. You can also design measurements that involve more than one particle at a time. For example, you might measure the distance between two atoms, and then you will know exactly how far those two atoms are from one another, but at the same time you will have no idea where the two of them are. So designing different measurements, we can ask different questions and cause the probability haze to collapse into a particular state. If we ask simple questions, it collapses into a simple answer. And if we ask complex questions, it collapses into a complex state. So Schrödinger thought to test the limits of just how complex a question you might ask. Can you make a measurement of whether a cat is alive? And does it make any sense to say that before that measurement the cat was in a quantum superposition? It was half live cat and half dead cat. Now, before we talk about life, let's talk a moment about machines, ordinary macroscopic machines built by humans. Most of our machines are built to work reliably, so we want their behavior to be predictable. All this quantum mechanical probability haze is an enemy. A car engine, for example, is designed in such a way that it averages over huge numbers of molecules, say gasoline molecules that are burning in oxygen molecules in the air. And though the behavior of any one molecule might be perfectly unpredictable because of quantum mechanics, the behavior of the average is what's important for the car as a whole. And that's very, very predictable. So we might be tempted to say machines of macroscopic size are not governed by quantum mechanics, or at least they're constructed in a way so as to mask or to average the laws of quantum mechanics and all the tiny molecules of which the machine is built. That's not the whole story. There are other kinds of machines. Think of a Geiger counter. That's a machine that's designed to do exactly the opposite. A Geiger counter takes each quantum event, say the decay of a particular radioactive atom, and it amplifies that event into a macroscopic motion. The counter clicks, the needle jumps, something very big, very classical happens, but it's triggered by a single quantum event. A Geiger counter is a device for collapsing a particular wave function in a particular way, making a particular quantum measurement, and amplifying it up so that it has a big effect. And in a sense, an MRI machine is doing the same thing. So now is where it gets more interesting. A living thing, a cell, or a human being. Is the body a machine like a car designed for reliability that averages over billions and zillions of quantum events? Well, that's the way most scientists tend to think about it, that the living animals are machines, they're deterministic machines. But gee, isn't it striking that biological experiments never come out the same in two different runs? Macroscopic physics experiments are repeatable, but macroscopic biology experiments, they're all run with statistics. So, are there aspects of living things that are more like a Geiger counter and less like a car engine? We know that our eyes are so sensitive that in a darkened room we can see just a handful of photons as a flicker of light. A photon is a single quantum of light. Owls have eyes that are a little more sensitive than ours. They can actually see a single photon. The tiny transistors on the latest generation of computer chip are made of just a few thousand atoms. They can't make the transistors much smaller than that, because then they would start behaving like quantum entities. They'd be uncertain. That would introduce errors and unpredictability into the computation. We don't want that. But there's another animal entirely called a quantum computer that actually takes advantage of the quantum behavior. And far from introducing errors, these quantum computers are vastly more powerful. They can perform many calculations at once. It's as if the whole range, the whole superposition, the probability function was computing at every point along the way, and not just one computation per atom, but you get an unlimited number in principle. So our nerve cells are much smaller than a chip, but much larger than a single transistor. A transistor may be billions of transistors on a modern chip. The machinery inside the cell works one molecule at a time. So these are molecular machines. They're machines that have thousands of atoms in them. Only living cells have molecular machines like this. We haven't been able to manufacture anything that actually serves a function and is built on the molecular scale, and we don't know to what extent quantum mechanics affects their behavior. Are our nerve cells like transistors on a chip, or are they more like quantum computers? So the next step takes us a little far afield. It's a little harder to follow, but it's really the crux of McFadden's argument. It's about what he calls the quantum Zeno effect. The amazing result is that by choosing measurements that you make, you don't know what the result of the measurement is going to be, but you know that, say, now you're going to measure some particular component or some particular direction. You can change something about a system gradually from one state to another state by gradually changing the questions you ask, changing the measurements that you make when you do your red light, green light game. And you can see the very simplest example of the quantum Zeno effect with just a flashlight and a couple of Polaroid filters, like the polarizing filter in a pair of sunglasses. A flashlight beam contains a mixture of all polarizations at once, vertical to horizontal, every angle in between. But if you shine a flashlight through a vertical polarizing filter, then a very quantum thing happens. Every photon has to decide whether it's vertical or horizontal. It may be thinking, oh, I'm a 41 degree photon, or I'm an 87 degree photon, but every single photon has to choose on the spot. Half of them are going to decide to be vertical, the other half will decide to be horizontal. The ones that decide to be horizontal get stopped dead. Half of them get stopped dead by this filter. And the ones that decide to be vertical, they go right through. And this works because they're not really different photons. They're really, all the photons are in a superposition state of all the different polarizations at once. Polarization is just a direction of vibration of the electric field within the light. So passing the photon through the Polaroid filter is like making a measurement in the red light, green light game. You catch the photon and it immediately becomes one thing or the other. Of the light that get through this first filter, they're all 100% vertical. So if you put another vertical filter on, they all get through the second one too, because if they got through the first, they can get through the second. Should be just exactly as bright going through two filters at once, and you see it's not quite just as bright in this video because the filters aren't perfect. On the other hand, if you turn the second filter at a right angle, then anything that gets through the first can't get through the second. It gets very black. The light that gets through the first is all vertical, and it doesn't have a chance of making it through the second. So now you get to see the quantum Zeno effect by adding a third filter, which will pull the photons around from vertical to horizontal. Here's how it works. You separate these two filters and you see none get through. Everything that gets through the first can't get through the second. But by introducing a third filter in between, this final stop red light green light game in the middle, you can actually make more light get through the three filters than could get through the two filters. Well, what's that about? How did it happen? The photons that get through the first filter are all vertical, but now by the second filter you're asking, well, are you 45 degrees to the right or 45 degrees to the left? And half of them, half of the half that got through the first, will decide they're 45 degrees to the right. And now, after they've gotten through that second filter, they no longer remember that they used to be vertical. All they know is the last measurement that they made, which is, all right, I'm 45 degrees to the right, and the ones that are 45 degrees to the left got stopped. So when they get to the horizontal filter, they're no longer thinking, I'm a vertical photon, they're thinking I'm a 45-degree photon. So half of the half of the half get through all three filters. That's 1/8 of the photons get through all three filters. And this is the Zeno principle that says by introducing this in-between measurement in between, you can change some of the photons from being vertical to being horizontal. And if you had more Polaroid filters, you could do even better actually. If you use three filters, say at 30, 60, 90 degrees instead of at 45 degrees, then instead of getting just a quarter of the light through, you'd get 9/16. You'd get about 56% of the through. So just replacing this 45-degree filter with a 2, a 30, and a 60, you do a lot better already. And if you do it in little steps, say 8 filters at 10 degrees, 20 degrees, 30 degrees, all the way up to 80 degrees, then almost all of the light gets through. And you would have changed those vertical photons to being horizontal photons just by asking the right questions that nudge them along a little bit at a time. This is the inverse quantum Zeno effect, and it is quite general. You can, by asking the right series of questions, change any system ever so gradually into any other system in principle. So the big question now is, can this apply to life? Can we apply this principle of quantum Zeno to make evolution more efficient? What we do know is that living things in some cases are capable of harnessing quantum mechanics. And we know that in all interpretations of quantum theory, the observation is the red light and the red light green light game. That's the observation that can change reality. But exactly what is an observation? Does it have to be done by a conscious entity? This is a question on which reasonable quantum physicists may differ. We also know the quantum Zeno effect can allow someone, in principle, to guide a system slowly along a path by carefully choosing what observations to make. we also know there's a need for a new theory. There's something basic we don't understand about evolution. And now we take this awfully big leap to propose, well, maybe it's the consciousness of the living things that are created along the way. Consciousness of these products of evolution are gradually pulling the evolutionary process through. It's the observations made by these living things that are the driving force that makes evolution so much more efficient than it would be otherwise. I wouldn't say this is a theory about how evolution is more efficient, but it's a step toward a theory. It's an idea that I think can be very fruitful, that we can think a lot more about. And as Feynman said, it's a crazy idea. It's so crazy that it just might be right.